Hello and welcome back to The Dive, Season 2, Episode 25. I'm Jat, here with Azale, and today we've got a very special guest joining us. You might be used to Freak, he has disagreeableness and bad jokes, but today we have Kobe. How you feeling?
The triumphant return.
I'm glad to be back for sure.
Yeah. Can you be as disagreeable as Freak on the show today?
I'll think of some insults for both of you.
Okay.
Some targeted insults.
That's going to be tough because there's really not much to attack, you know?
Yeah. The perfect human being over here.
It's tough, but you might be able to come up with something. But some pretty exciting stuff happened last night. We can start with the global news. Obviously, LCK Playoffs, everyone knows, is going on, and Africa was able to take down Kingzone. They have now won back-to-back series, 5-1 in playoffs. They were 10-8 in regular season. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's really crazy. There were 4 teams at the end of the regular season at 13-5, with tiebreakers essentially giving the seeding to the playoffs and putting KT in the finals. Africa had a bad second half of the split. People thought they were dead in the water. It was all about whether Gen G. I actually thought Kingzone was going to win the split. That's what I said on yesterday's episode. And they lost 3-1 to Africa, to the Predator Gragas from Spirit, to I think dominant bottom lane play, at least in the first 2 games. And I think a little bit of Kingzone choking. A little bit like we've seen in international events.
Yeah, I just really like that. You know, Africa, even as you said, even though they had a difficult second half, this team, everyone can get behind them once again, right?
Yeah.
Because they have that history of all these, you know, crazy strategies they've been pulling out. And I also like the stories behind Kuro, right? He used to be the mid laner where they were like, well, he can kind of hold mid lane, right? He's not the big star or whatever, but he's popping off, playing Talon and stuff like that, still bringing out his Vel'Koz and all these different champions. They have Kramer, who came back to the LCK, and he's just, doing really well at home again. So I don't know. There's a lot of good like individual stories for those guys. So it's cool to get behind that team, even though it wasn't as expected, I guess.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit about the implications for that match. Because KT is going to either finish first or second, first place would give them the first seed from Korea. But actually, since Kingzone is out and Gen G is out and SKT is out, no matter what, they will either be first seed or second seed, because if they don't win, they'll have the most championship points, and the most championship points also goes to Worlds. So KT is in Worlds. Pressure's off for the final. We'll see if they end up winning it.
Can't choke if you don't play.
That was the funniest thing because, a couple of weeks ago, people were trying to theory craft the ways that they could still lose out and not lock. And now everyone's like, oh, we're actually locked, right?
Yeah.
Double check that. Check that. We're locked.
Yeah, we're in Worlds, please. It also means, crazily, that the 3 teams that were from the LCK at Worlds last year in Samsung and SKT, which was the finals, as well as Kingzone, will all be in the Korean regional qualifier fighting for that final spot.
Yeah.
And that means 2 of the 3 are either going to Africa, KT's in for sure, or Griffin, and one of those teams will also be in the regional qualifier. And those are the 6 teams that are still in the running for Worlds. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty crazy. And for me, kind of one of the things that I come away from this, again, is just being like, Kingzone, you said, choke, tilt, whatever you want to call it. Like, how many times now has it been? It's been a lot internationally. Yeah. This seemed like a huge kind of choke as well. I mean, Kingzone, they beat Africa 2-0 last time they played. They beat them 2-1 earlier in the season. And there were so many times in this series.
In the finals in spring.
Yeah, well, there's so many times in this series where I'm watching what they're doing. They're mis-executing dives. They're at least 2 games they failed a 2v1 dive top and died. Which is something that seems like completely uncharacteristic for Con and Peanut. There's one time, I think it's game 2, where they get 3-for-0 bot lane, and then BDD's like, but I could hold the turret 1v5 though, right? And then he dies. It's like they just seem like they're tilted when you're watching them, and it's kind of disappointing to see. But at what point does the team blow up? Like, I'm really getting curious of if they don't make Worlds, do all these guys just go into different squads?
I don't know about blowing up, but at least they need to stop getting so much credit, right? Before people are going through levels of excuses, and they're like, oh, okay, the international events, that's where they took out all the international events. And now we're like, okay, well, now they're just choking in all important events. Like, if you choke 3 times a year, then that's just part of how this team plays, right? That's not like an abnormality usually is what people talk about when they talk about choking.
Right. Well, I also would say that I I don't think the team should blow up because they did win
Yeah.
2 LCK championships in a row. Like they won summer 2017, spring 2018.
I guess I just see them as like they were built to win the world championship, right? Like that's how, at least how I look at Kingzone when I see it.
Well, I also think that's what KT was built for.
I mean,
Right? And that's the craziest thing about this. KT was built to take down SKT and go to Worlds last year, and we thought that they would blow up, and they looked like the maximum amount of boom when they failed in the regional qualifiers a year ago. But they stayed together. They're grinding it out, and they're kind of in Worlds together. Obviously, a lot has to do with happiness, and I feel like when the pressure is really on Kingzone, that's where their biggest weakness is. And for whatever reason, in the prior 2 LCK finals, I'd almost say the pressure was lower on them because the expectations were lower. But whenever the expectations are really high, when they're the sole representative of Korea at MSI, or when they are supposed to be the best team in the world at the 2017 World Championships, that's when they're really faltering. So sometimes that ends up with teams blowing up. I just wouldn't say that they would have to because they're still clearly really, really, really good.
They definitely don't have to. It's just one of those things where like I keep expecting them to succeed, and I feel like the players are going to have the same expectations where they're expecting to, okay, well, it happened last time, but I'm sure we learned from it. Sure, it's not going to happen this time, and it keeps happening.
Yeah.
And like you have these players that are of the caliber that they could easily be winning Worlds. They could be on a team that is, going all the way, right? And at a certain point, I think, players start wanting more. And maybe, hey, their attitudes within the team and like the relationships are still great, and then they're going to stay together and they're just going to work on it over time, and that's awesome. But it's just, I hadn't really ever thought of that before with Kingzone, and then this year, for the first time, I really am kind of wondering, like after the split, hey, are they going to, blow up? SKT, obviously, there's a lot of turmoil there, right? There's a lot of talk about like what Faker would do if SKT doesn't make World, what these guys
There's
would
still
do.
the regional qualifier to play.
Of course,
right?
of course,
Kingzone
of course.
could still go to World.
I know, but it's just an interesting thing to talk
Yeah.
about because there's more teams now with so much star power that I think like there's more instability right now in some of those LCK teams.
I feel like fans are very often too quick to pull a trigger and just blow teams up, though, or push the button or whatever you're using.
Well, it's not up to us.
Whatever Azael's controls are for his team destroying devices. I know.
I'm not saying
we
should. They should do it. I just think it's interesting to talk about.
It is interesting to talk about, but like, I feel like people panic a bit too much in following League because League of Legends changes so quickly, and the people are used to this super quick pace. For instance, I wanted to pull up TSM as another example. If we looked at why Reginald, made the changes that he did from the Doublelift, Bjergsen, Sven Skaren iteration of TSM, and traded for Sven and Mithy and did that whole thing.
Yep.
That was one of the teams where like they had multiple chances. That was a team that was super outspoken about practicing the most, having the hardest schedule. They smashed NA, probably the cleanest.
They're the only
that we
team
ever had
to ever win 3 NA splits in a row.
Yeah,
And they blew that team up.
because they failed at Worlds a couple times.
Exactly, which is
in,
like the
in a
Kingzone
similar
thing,
way,
right?
right? In groups or whatever. And hindsight, of course, is going to be like, oh, they never should have blown up, or whatever. But they never should have blown it up or whatever. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, of
Like
course.
reminiscent Kobe. What if GSM still had double lift?
I mean, if Biofrost, Doublelift, Sven Skaren, Hanser, and Bjergsen were still the team,
It's about your goals,
Right?
though, right? At the end of the day, it's all about your goals. So it's
Yeah.
like we talk about playing to win instead of like losing slowly kind of thing in
Yeah.
League, right? This is like the real life concept of that, where
Yeah.
you're saying, okay, TSM Kingzone, great, you're winning the regional titles, but that's not what you want. You want to win the world title, right? So
Yeah.
you try to shoot for the fences, and those aren't always going to work
But-
out. And I think that's what Reggie was trying to do with TSM. He was trying to swing for the fences, right?
But my question is, should shooting for the fences look like changing players, or should shooting for the fences look like putting a bunch of money and sticking with these players and building on what you already have? Do you have to fail this many times at international events for some people, to work through this and actually gain that level?
I think it's completely dependent on this situation, right? Like it's
Yeah,
situation by
people are
situation.
different.
Because if the players are all still very invested and have faith in each other and have faith in the team and the structure, then totally invest, right? Like we know that Kingzone has they're at their peak. They are that caliber, right? So if they can fix whatever issues they have, get them more comfortable in these situations, then hey, you could stick it out and you can make it work. But I mean, if everyone hates each other and they're like, it's this goddamn mid laner.
For the record, for my example, the TSM one, at least Double F on his stream was talking about that was the team. Like those players wanted to keep doing it.
So I mean, in that case, obviously retrospect, hindsight, right? Like you shouldn't have done it. But looking at it through Reggie's point of view, it was they didn't have good enough communication, and these guys have already been in the semifinals. You bring them in, it's guaranteed, right?
And from his point of view, he had been trying this same goal for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? Since he was a player. That was always his goal. They failed internationally. They failed internationally with multiple iterations. It wasn't just that iteration. So you can definitely see how
starts to look the same.
That has built up for him, right? That's been his whole life since he was a teenager.
I mean, just to quickly pull it back to LCK, which is what the topic was.
Yeah.
Well, hold on.
Isaiah brought up a new topic, which was blowing up team.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was talking about LCK.
Is a team that didn't blow up
Yeah.
when most people thought they would because they had assembled so many stars and failed. In a sense, if we want to bring in TSM again, it would be like if this TSM.
Wait, Jack, you want to talk about LCK?
We don't want to bring in TSM. Get out of here.
See what you're doing over here? Some sleight of hand. Oh.
All roads lead to TSM. It would be almost as if this TSM team that is failing this split, if you keep them together for another road and then they succeed, because this KT team didn't win an LCK split, they didn't go to Worlds, but they stayed together and now they are going to Worlds.
This TSM is looking a little
Like
bit lower in the standings.
Real quick before we move on to the meta, I do want to talk about the 7-man roster that a lot of people are talking about, how you can bring 7 players into the North American LCS players. I do also want to remind people that this was the case in the 2017 spring playoffs as well. Phoenix One brought a 7-man roster into playoffs back then. And there is, as far as I know, a little bit different way that the North American LCS does their rule sets now. They're not tied to what the international rule set is. They're free to make their own decisions, and a lot of it is just the owners and league ops like voting on changes, and that's why we have 2 coaches on stage, because a lot of teams wanted that, and that's why we have 7-man rosters going into playoffs. It doesn't mean that there's 7-man rosters at international events. There's still going to be 6-man rosters, and I just think it's interesting because the 2 coaches and the larger rosters in playoffs is something that the LPL and the LCK have been doing for years, and then kind of adjusting down to 6. But do you guys have any thoughts on like the one team that could be utilizing the 7-man roster in C9, or if it has a large implication on playoffs at all?
I mean, I think everyone's like really hyping it up because we saw, Golden Glue and Svenskeren pop off, right? And they slammed TL, and that was awesome. But I want to see it utilized throughout a series successfully and throughout a playoff run successfully before I really jump on it. And I'm like, wow, this is how it should be done, because we saw it's kind of similar, like Sword and Shield, Impact, and Ray. They're going to be swapping back and forth, and one's going to play carries, and it never really felt like it panned out for me, like in playoffs and over the long run. And if you are like tipping your hand, if you do end up being like, oh, well, Svenskeren comes in to play Lee Sin or whatever, then when he gets subbed in, people ban Lee Sin, right? So I think you really have to prove that it's not just about champion pool, it's about playstyle too, because people can target champion pool very easily, where it's harder, I think, to sometimes adjust to different playstyles.
Yeah, and obviously, Golden Glue and Sven were working really well together and camping mid and all that. But the part that I liked about the explanation during that night when Reapered, was trying to catch up and tweeted out, his explanation was that they had practiced the main roster versus TL specifically a lot. And so that was one of the reasons why they were swapping them in. And that one makes sense to me. And it also allows you to get, the super good practice partners, right? They want to practice the #1 team. And then having the other guys, practice against some other team or whatever. will give you that extra level of unknown strategy, whereas they got to practice versus the main roster of Team Liquid for.
I guess the question that I come to is then it's like how unknown is Golden Glue playing Syndra, right? Like how different is it truly than having Jensen play Syndra? Like it's not like Jensen, it's not a champion that Jensen can't play, right? So a lot of people are theorizing that it's a champion pool thing, that Golden Glue was going to come in and he was going to play Akali or Talon or something like that, or Fizz, right? Because he had played Fizz and Akali and Academy the night before. And it's interesting because it worked, right? Like obviously very clearly worked, paid off, but is this the right decision? Like if you're in finals and stuff, like if you're, in game 5 or whatever, do you want Golden Glue playing on stage over Jensen if they're both going to play the same champion? And that's what it kind of comes down to me.
I think in a perfect world, it's a way to correct tilt as quickly as possible. Hey, this guy had a really bad game. Or, hey, this guy actually does play a little bit differently. It's like switching pitchers in a baseball game is the hope that the team can still communicate like that. And we always have this conversation, even with 6-man rosters. 7-man rosters is just a little bit more. If your team is comfortable playing with those different players and they do switch it up in a more meaningful way than a different champion could, it can be worth it. It's just the risks are usually so high and it requires you to actually field that many good players that it's usually just impossible to do.
Also, I don't think the differences in strategy have to be as enormous as changing the entire direction that you're taking your team in.
Yeah.
A change in strategy could be, Jensen usually reacts this way when I'm throwing skill shots at him in lane. He usually trades this way when there is, 2 low health minions versus going for a health trade. Golden Glue would make the other decision. So literally just having that difference of we've practiced against this team. So, Poe Belter got very used to laning in this way versus this player, and this guy reacting this way when a jungler's near or this way when he's not. And Golden Glue just does it slightly different. Those types of things making them a little bit more off the norm and a little bit more off of what to expect, I think actually go a long way. And if you have multiple positions, you're doing that, especially jungle that has so much variance and every decision means so much for jungle, I think have big impact.
And this is kind of a tangent off of that, and why jungle, I feel like, is one of the best positions to swap in and out is when I'm learning jungle and I'm trying to figure out which junglers work, I usually figure out a jungle path that is the best. This is the fastest way this champion can clear, and this is the gank that I will do every game on this champion, right?
That's not a good way to keep
legitimately in
jungling.
solo queue, that's actually how I climbed like way back in the day. Like in season 1, for instance, I would do 3 small camps on Udyr. I would base. I would kill the 2 buffs in the 3 small camps again, and I would hit level 5 while bot lane was still level 3, and I would gank bot lane.
No matter what champions they have, no matter where the lane is.
If they were like super pushed in, I wouldn't, and I'd just go counter jungler or something. But if they were pushed up, I would always do that gank. And that got me to top 50 in season 1, right? On the ladder. But in pro play with analysts and all these other teams, it's so easy to just know that tendency or learn that tendency about a player, and then you have to switch it up and find what's my second best path, what's my third best path, what's my top lane ganking path, what's my mid lane ganking path. And those tendencies you do subconsciously learn, but different junglers actually do so many different things. I think it's the most variant role, and depending on who you're playing and playing against, you have to be able to do suboptimal things frequently in order to kind of surprise the other team. But if you're trying to climb in solo queue, find the best path, do the same gank every game, and you'll get good at it.
It's not the way to like master the role and to become the absolute best. But I do think if you're talking about just generically climbing, like when I talk to a lot of friends about climbing, it's like, how do you climb in jungle? All right, well, you play like Volibear and you power farm, and then you like.
Kobe doesn't agree to this guy.
But it's one of the most effective ways. Like just having high farm, high CS in solo queue is, I think, the easiest way to climb. Learning
and you still react to the game, but you should know what the best path is for a jungler.
I disagree with both of them. I think you should not form bad habits like this.
No, but if your goal is just to get gold or something like that, it's super. I
still think it's forming bad habits, because there are other reasons why that player is gold as well. So baking in this bad habit on top of the other things that are holding them back is not going to bring them up to that level.
It's not a bad habit to know this is the fastest way.
A bad habit to do the same exact route every game and gank every time?
No one knows you're going to do the same route. If it's literally the most efficient route, there's nothing wrong with doing it.
Oh, I'm tilted. What did Freak do to you guys? Holy
I did this 7 years ago, Kobe. It has nothing to do with Freak.
I do like that you brought out the old rankings though, because then Freak's gonna bring out his.
Oh, he's like, I was ranked 1 in beta
rank 1
before there was a ladder.
I was ranked 3.
Oh sure, yeah, okay, me too. I was ranked -1. Like, congratulations.
You're just making stuff up.
Yeah,
you can't be ranked 1. I was actually legitimate. I was ranked 3.
Right.
There you go. All right. Well, okay, let's move on. Let's go onto the meta. We can talk about some of the patch changes that are happening, and there's a lot of them. This patch is pretty interesting just because it's so many little changes that I think are going to add up to mean a lot. Like, essentially, for me, the thing that I immediately look at is all the burst runes that are actually getting nerfed. So like Airy, Electrocute, Celerity, Cheap Shot, Sudden Impact, Scorch all got hit. And are all worse, like especially at the lower ranks, or like early levels, are significantly worse. Cheap Shot, the base damage at level 1 is like half what it was before. It's 15, now it's 8. So these are some pretty big changes. And to me, the thing that, like, each individually, it's not that crazy, but all these changes that I've been seeing throughout the game, like a lot of the kind of OPs getting nerfed, marksman getting buffed, now a lot of the burst damage stuff getting nerfed as far as runes, it's just feeling like it's pushing the game more and more and more and more towards late game team fights, slower pace of game, more tanks. And like, I immediately think, okay, well, what's like the greediest stuff you can get away with? If it's harder to actually get burst down and killed in the early game, if junglers are doing less damage because they don't have Electrocute doing as much and all these sorts of things, then it's like, all right, play hyperscaling, right? Like, play that tank, like, that scales to late game, or play, like, oh, you want to play Kayle top lane because people aren't going to be able to all in you as easily, and these sorts of things, and just thinking about how to best get to late game in the best, like, kind of shape.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but I'm still on this jungling topic, Kobe. Do you have? Are we done with that conversation before we?
Well, Zil just had a very long.
I know, but I
transition.
couldn't think about it. Because there's a lot of junglers in this patch, for instance.
Okay.
Right? Tank junglers in this patch.
And it all comes back to season 1.
So you legitimately think that the best way to climb is to do the same thing?
I don't think it's
over
the best
and
way to
over.
climb.
Because I fundamentally disagree with your philosophy here.
Okay, so for instance, if I'm jungling on a Mumu, I don't have enough Amumu games in on this patch to like know what the fastest way or most efficient way of clearing is. But if I wanted to get good at him, I would go in custom games and think of like all of the different paths I could do. Like, if I wanted to go top lane, this would be my path to go top lane. And if I started the game and wanted to go mid lane, this would be my path to go mid lane. Right? And you need to pre-practice all of that stuff. If you're improving it in the game, you're losing like 20 seconds.
Yes, knowing all these different things is good. Doing the same thing every single game is bad.
What if that's just the best thing to do?
You
Bottom lane is an important
You cannot have the best thing to do every single game. There is zero way that you can apply a single strategy to every single iteration of champions and players that occurs in ranked solo queue.
Yeah, and there's always going to be reactions. Like if the mid lane opens up halfway through my fast clear, I'm going to go mid lane. If
figuring out your fastest farm route is good to know, but you don't always want to do that.
Yeah, you don't do exactly and put like your blinders on and ignore it, but you should. Like Reignover, for instance, is the best pather in the league. Right, and he has a bunch of other things that are wrong with his game, but he I guarantee you spends more time thinking about jungle paths than anyone else in the league, and
and I guarantee you he doesn't do the same one every single game.
You could and still climb pretty high if you wanted to.
I don't see why you want to come back to this, because you're not changing your point, and I fundamentally disagree with your idea.
I think you're misunderstanding the point. Like, I'm saying figure out whatever the most efficient routes are and do those most of the time. You don't need to have like 18
so now you're using different words and you're saying routes.
I'm telling you
plural.
exactly what I did in season 1. 90% of the time, my goal going into the game was to gank bottom when I was level 5 and they were level 3. And I just repeated that over and over again and climbed.
Yeah.
That works.
I mean, that worked anecdotally in your one way, and you are already a player that is not gold, right? So you're going to climb out, and there's no evidence that that was what caused you to climb out. The fact that you were doing the same route, I'm quite sure if you spent as much time figuring out that route efficiently to gank bottom, and you had another option for ganking top. You had another option for, well, you don't play invade champions, but if you had another option for, they're playing Heck Room, right? So I have all different routes for
This is my
depending
route
on
to steal
what the enemy champions are, what their mid laner is, if I can go kill him at his blue buff and stuff like that. That to me is fundamentally a stronger way of approaching the game than simply dumbing it down to basic. I'm only going to default, clear my own stuff, gank that bottom side. Especially if you start climbing and then you start running into the same people.
Yeah. Once they can learn your tendencies, you need to mix it up.
Yeah.
But yes, 15 routes is better than one route. Okay, sorry, Azael. Kobe and I had to hash this out. We're going to talk about.
By all means, continue. I'm enjoying it. I mean, I'm not quite sure if you guys understand.
We're still really kind of talking past each other a little bit because I have invade routes as well, but I think it's fine to do one. Okay. Your point was just kind of generally talking about the patch and all the damage nerfs to the runes and how is that going to change play style.
That's true. So basically, like, my thing is talking a lot about, we talked about for 815, Marksman getting some optimizations in their build paths. Like, Stormrazor is 400 gold cheaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Zeal items are cheaper, all these sorts of things. To me, we're already pushing the game more towards late game, right? And even in 814, before those came in, at least in NA LCS, people were almost exclusively playing Marksman. All these changes just push me more towards Marksman because it's more about consistent DPS. It's less about burst. It becomes more about scaling. When you have a scaling Marksman, you want a front line. It's all about like pushing towards that sort of style. I do think that allows for Split Push to come in as well because it's a slower paced game. So you have like teams like Optic who can then say, okay, well, if you're going to wait 40 minutes for your Marksman to have 6 items to try to team fight, well, we're going to wait that 40 minutes on our Fiora and try to take your base, right? So I think there are still multiple ways to play the game, but it becomes so much more about scaling, less about early game. And for me, then that just becomes like, I just immediately think, all right, well, what's like the kind of greediest champion I can get away with, right? Like, can I play Kayle every game top lane? And just by the time they're going to do anything, I'm already 2 items and then I feel like a god, right?
Yeah. When I'm even thinking about the jungle runes, like Electrocute, for instance, is still good in lane because even though the damage is lower, the cooldown is also much lower. But out of the jungle, you're only proccing that every minute. So I think a lot of champions that were taking Electrocute should at least experiment with either Predator or Dark Harvest. I think in solo queue, Dark Harvest will be good. In pro, it's probably too slow to have any kind of effectiveness. And stuff like Spirits, Predator, Gragas, I think will become a lot more prevalent. I think you might end up seeing Predator on a lot of other domination junglers. But then there's also a chance that with Sudden Impact and Cheap Shot and those runes getting nerfed as well, that you are exploring other stuff like an Airy or a Comet jungler. Kobe, what do you think?
I think it's pretty interesting, especially the Predator. But if Predator starts to become the go-to domination one, we see more and more of that. I feel like laners are going to start complaining about Predator because that's a rune where if the guy has it and they successfully gank you with it, you feel like garbage. And you're like, what the heck? This guy came out of nowhere, running 1,000 miles an hour, ganked me and killed me. Where you don't really have the comparison of, he didn't have it and he just had Electrocute or whatever, and I'm missing that damage. And the laner doesn't feel what the jungler is giving up to take Predator, but they do feel when the jungler succeeds with it. So I feel like that's going to be a super swinging one if it does become very popular. I'd be very curious to see what the community reaction is, and if I bet they would try and pressure for nerfs or something like that. But as far as the resurgence of tanks as well, Aftershock has not been touched at all. So Aftershock is still going to be a good option. And remember, they changed it a while ago to be more targeted at bruisers, where the defenses actually do scale with damage pretty decently as well. And that's why it has flat values and stuff. So you can take it on things, like Vi or something like that, or these squishier people that would take Electrocute. And that might be a pseudo replacement for some people.
True.
But yeah, I mean, there's just going to be less damage flying around early, a lot in the lanes as well. And that combined with this resurgence of Time Warp Tonic and Corrupting Potions for everybody. Yeah. I feel like a lot of laners and everyone taking biscuits. Not as prevalent in solo queue, but I feel like more and more laners are going to be more and more healthy. So I'm not quite sure if their trades are going to be as impactful or if there'll be as many windows for junglers to gank and then they might take Predator to try and force that. Because if you have Predator, then you don't care and you're going all in.
Yeah. I feel like there's a chance we get some really long laning phases.
Could be.
I'm hoping we don't get it, but
Play Nasus, stack it up.
816 is the playoff patch. And for those of you who don't know, in the mid lane, if you go sorcery, primary, inspiration, secondary, and your inspiration is Time Warp Tonic and Biscuits, and you start Corrupting Potion, and if you build an early Dark Seal, it is an insane amount of sustain. If you have that and your opponent doesn't have, you just take non-fatal trades all laning phase, and you will win. And every time you recall, you refresh that Corruption Potion. So I think almost every laner moves towards that. We've even seen it on a lot of top laners. That's why Gangplank was making his resurgence as well, because he could go this spec. So you add that to the fact the jungler ganks are now doing probably about 30 to 50 less damage on average. Got yourself a long game.
Yeah. I do think that long laning phases are interesting, but not infinite sustain feeling.
Not if
laning
no one
phases,
can kill
right?
the other person.
Yeah, if I feel like I've done all this work and we did all these trades and you're drinking your potion, I'm drinking mine, and eventually, you know, we get down and I've got an extra charge or 2 charges or something, that feels pretty good. But if that person can then just, you know, leave, go by and come back or whatever, and the teleport nerf is good. You know, an extra min or whatever would nerf that strategy that you can just go refill and teleport back. But you know, if you don't feel like you can make enough progress in the long lane phase, then that might be the problem.
And that's why I think then you look at hyperscaling stuff, right? Because that's then me making progress. It's like, sweet, you picked your Darius or whatever, but I picked Kale. We're both sitting there. We're both just farming.
Azale really wants to play
That's
Kale
one way.
again.
You really want to play Kale.
Or whatever.
The other thing you can
that's
do...
just to me, when I think of top lane, I think of greedy scaling champions. I think of Kale.
The other thing you can do, though, is
You're going to get camped.
it can more incentivize fast clearing junglers as well, because even though people won't be taking as much fatal damage in lane, if you get either lane pressure through shove or jungle pressure through shove, that's the other way you get advantages aside from just straight up killing people. And then your jungle clear speed becomes the most important thing. Trundle nerfs, I think, hurt that as well. Like, he's a decent early game dueling jungle clearer.
The Trundle nerf seemed random to me.
So someone ran the numbers on this. At max rank, level 9 is when it hits the hardest, but by the time you're level 18, even though the base damage on rank 5 Chomp is down by 60, since the total attack damage is up by 0.2, he loses about 16 damage at max rank, not 40, because that's the most extreme thing. It still pushes me away from the champion. I see that. I don't want to play him when he was really the stat stick that he wins or loses.
It just feels like this change to me seems like the most only for pro change like I've seen almost in a while. Because like when I think of Trundle's win rates are not very good in solo queue at all in top lane or in jungle. Like I think they're like last time I looked, I believe they were under 50. You can double check for me.
I think
maybe
he's actually pretty high. Have you seen Dave play Trundle?
I have, but
It's
but
not an
like,
only for pro change. He's pretty effective on that
But
champion.
it's not that the champion can't work, but my point was just more like, especially that it's, you know, they're saying Trundle's dueling potential is too high, even if he isn't building damage. That immediately I just think of like the Cinderhulk, Knight's Vow, press the attack Trundle is getting too much value in competitive play, right?
Right. He's at 52 in Plat Plus.
Oh wow,
on Lawlytics.
Okay, that's
he's
a lot
up
higher than I would have thought. Is that for jungle or for top lane?
That's jungle.
Oh, okay, maybe I was looking at Trundle top, but anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting. That it was, okay, so he's under 50 for top lane, which is what I was thinking of. But either way, I mean, it is going to be a bit of a hit, you know, in competitive play. Like, people do generally just go pure tank, right? It is all Cinderhulk, Knight's Vow, etc. So damage changes like this can be fairly meaningful. 40 off that is pretty big. The other thing I was going to mention, Kobe, when you were talking about TP stuff, is another change they had in here to try to, I think, take more TPs out, is the heal buff. So 30 seconds off of heal in the bottom lane. So it's like, please, God, marksman, stop taking teleport.
30 seconds is a lot.
That's a ton. I mean, TP got nerfed, and when you look at the differential, right? TP gets nerfed a minute, heal gets buffed 30 seconds. So they really clearly don't want people taking a TP in the bottom lane. I immediately just am thinking, okay, they want all the marksmen to be
They're
healed.
serving up the heal on a nice platter. They got the waiter. They're like, please, it's 50% off. Take heal.
The problem is, though, it's in the same patch that they're nerfing all the bursts.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're nerfing all the bursts and you're taking off like 50 damage or whatever we're saying it is off of like maximum burst potential with all these extra runes, maybe I don't need heal. Maybe I can still just stay on TP and get a better recall. Right. If you can't all in me, why would I take heal, right? Like it doesn't seem like you need to. So that's
So you
that's the
can
only
save
thing.
me when I'm low, Azael. Team player.
I'm gonna get that Storm Razor a little bit quicker.
Okay.
I'm a TP back to lane, so that's the only thing that makes me wonder about it. If this heals change was isolated, I would immediately say, yep, they're for sure all gonna be playing heal. But because all the burst runes got nerfed, I'm like, well, maybe people still just stay on TP because they're not thinking they're under threat.
Right. Okay.
One
You
more?
have a champion that you want to play next patch. Azael wants to play Kale.
Uh-huh.
And now, that makes sense. I want to play Hecarim.
Yeah. Oh, I thought for
It's
sure.
the one buff that actually looks pretty big. 20 damage max rank on Q, and that thing goes down to like a 2-second cooldown.
The thing is, though, that they only buff the late. If they had
But it's
buffed-
easier to get to late now.
Yeah,
Kobe.
yeah. But
Find your Hecarim path. No, I'm just kidding.
I've been waiting for a Hecarim buff, but the problem for me with this buff is like we waited so long that they combined it with the Celerity nerf, chat. Celerity is the rune that I built my entire build around for him, right?
It's
And
true.
when they changed it to have higher percentage damage conversion for it, it was actually really, really good for Hecarim.
Yeah.
And I got super excited. And I was like, oh, and they're gonna buff the champion too because his win rate's low, so it's gonna be perfect. And then I waited long enough for the champion buff, but now they're
So-
nerfing Celerity.
I've been playing pre-patch Hecarim, right, with Electrocute, Sudden Impact, and then like the Speed Red one.
Okay.
Relentless Hunter.
Yeah.
And then obviously Celerity Water Walking.
Yeah.
And he's really good when you just go Trinity Force first because that is way better than Cinderhulk first. And then I think the more effective Hecarim, even though everyone loves like the one-shot pony who runs
Ghostblade.
through with Ghostblade, I think that's a snowball build that you shouldn't be doing. It's like I think it's Cinderhulk
But
in
what
a
if I'm
tank.
snowballing?
It's Cinderhulk in a tank because with Electrocute, you were still one-shotting squishies. I think the trick will be now with Celerity nerf. I think you switch to Predator on Hecarim for sure.
Yeah. No electrocute.
No
for sure.
question. But with Sudden Impact nerf as well, and with Celerity not having damage, I'm going to have to play around with it because I'm considering trying to do something like an Aftershock Hecarim.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean that.
Will that lower my damage too much?
It's still so here's what you do: Aftershock Hecarim, but build the Ghostblade, chat. Build that sucker after. It's gonna give you that big speed boost. But yeah, with Celerity not converting as much, it won't be as much. But again, one of the other big changes a while ago that I think helped Hecarim out, and why I was waiting for a champion buff, was the change to Talisman, where junglers like no jungler has any mana problems at all anymore if you have Talisman. And Hecarim was one of the most mana hungry early on. So getting Talisman and being able to have mana regen in the river as well and the increased values of the mana regen is super good. So I think he's still probably good even with the Celerity nerf because the Celerity nerf is a few percent and I think you should be excited to try the
One other
changes.
thing I'm kind of interested to see if it comes in. I'm not sure if people are even going to look at it, but I actually think Nautilus support could be pretty decent with these changes. It's 6
That
seconds
shield is-
off of his W cooldown. So like at level 1, your base shield is 5 less, but like at late game, your base shield is 15 more. And the HP scaling is worse on it, but that matters less for support. It already has a higher win rate in support, and I think that having the cooldown like be 6 seconds lower is so much nicer because like in support you can go in, you can trade aggressively. Aftershock didn't get nerfed. You want to play Aftershock on this champion. A lot of the burst nerfs kind of getting hit. Maybe there's more room for a hard engaged tank like Nautilus in the bot lane.
Yeah.
What about the 3% for a Mumu, Jat?
So I checked my rank stats earlier for the season. I haven't played that much ranked. I think I'm 1-10 on a Mumu. I think it's time to hang up that champion for a little while. He's been one of my most played of
That's
like my
unlucky.
career. And when I got back in 2015 when I got Masters, I actually did it with a Mumu, but it's gonna make me pick him up again. I'm gonna try it, but I'm scared off by that 9% win rate that I have currently. With.
I was eyeballing the change, but then I was like, wait,
But then you have to play a move.
it's only 3%. I'll bring a Mumu back from the preseason. I literally haven't played him in like 5 years since I was
Play him a
ranked
lot.
3, Jack.
How did you get there? What kind of jungle
before
pathing did you
season.
use?
Yeah,
I was
what
playing.
was your go-to path?
It was Shaco and Ramus. And a
Ramus
Mumu.
got buffed too. They're bringing him back.
Hey, where's the Shaco buffs? Let's go.
All right, sweet. So that's gonna do it for the patch.
Yep.
Meta. We can move on to NA LCS. We got Optic versus TSM. I believe is the last game of Saturday, I want to say. Or it's, I think it was. Maybe.
Yeah. Well,
it's Saturday. Either way, it's going to be the most important game of the week, very likely, for deciding who makes it to playoffs. These two teams are obviously fighting for, one of those final playoff spots, and it's going to be hotly contested. They both got wins last week that weren't necessarily expected, over 100 Thieves and Echo Fox. So, the hype is building around this matchup.
Yeah, here's the situation.
Okay.
10 wins guarantees you in playoffs. We got FlyQuest, Cloud9, and Echo Fox all at 9. They just have to win 1 out of 2 games to make it in playoffs. 9 wins can still get you in playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
TSM and Optic, as the 8-8 teams that are tied for 6th place and playing each other right away, as well as having difficult matchups on Sunday. That's another thing we have to remember. TSM plays Liquid, and Optic, I believe, plays 100 Thieves. Really just makes this boil down to, even though it's not officially beat this team, you're going to jump over them in the playoffs, really feels like win this game and you're in playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Optic beat TSM the first time. When I look at a lot of their stats overall, team stats, they're actually really similar. They play really long games. They have the 2 lowest combined kills per minute of all teams in the North American LCS. Their goal difference of 15 is about 0. Like, they're very even. Never would have said this before the season, but TSM and Optic are very similar styled teams.
I think their games look pretty different, though, because Optic is so all in on split push recently. I don't really see TSM as that committed to it. They have had the Haunter Gnar game and stuff, but we've had a couple Fiora games, we've had the Jace, we've had multiple Yoriks. Optic is we're gonna split push.
Yeah, I agree that that the end of the game, the way they actually try and win, TSM does it through team fighting and Optic does it through split pushing. But the first 20 minutes of the game is just extended laning phases for the most part. Kobe?
I am getting to the point where I'm wondering if Optic will win without split push, because it's very predictable.
6 games in a row.
Now,
that's all they do.
Teams don't always have to be the super diverse team and be able to win with all different strategies. But I think that it's very easy for TSM to prep versus. What are you smiling about?
Nothing.
I think you did something and you thought I was going to
No,
notice
I didn't
it.
do anything. I was just immediately thinking about the diversity, and then I was thinking about the jungle pathing. So I was going to say, find your one jungle path.
More jungle.
and then you gank top for your split push.
Shut down your gank top
and then you're
jungle
guaranteed
path
to win.
on this champion.
But then I was like, it's too stupid of a point to make. But then you're like, why are you smiling? So now I had to
How else are
explain
you
it.
going to gank top? You have to find your most
How are you
efficient
going to gank
way,
for your split push if you don't know your path, Kobe?
and you don't want to let the other team know that you're going to do it.
So, Jat, if you are facing Optic,
Okay.
don't use your gank bottom path only.
Yeah.
Use your gank top path.
There we go.
I agree. In pro games, you absolutely need multiple paths. Climbing solo queue, you do not.
There you go. All right.
If bot's
this is
not
why I wasn't going
gankable,
to say it.
when you're level 5, you could just take Drake.
But
Both are good.
You just pulled it out of me.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we did. That was worth it. Yeah, I do think so. I think that it will be the matchup with Optic going some sort of split push strategy, because I think they also identified this is our way of winning. This is our strongest strategy. And I would not, if I was them, try and mix it up at this point, right? They had such a huge win streak. They got right back into good standing. They're 8-8 right now. Now they're on the precipice. They can almost get into playoffs. I think they should just double down on what they have been successful with. I hate it when we've seen teams find something, be successful with it. At the last second, everyone's criticizing them. Oh, but they can only win in this one way. Then they try and mess it up, and they're like, well, yeah, you can only win in that one way. Now you didn't win.
Especially when you're 6th or 7th and you're only winning half your game.
Yeah.
You don't need to prove that you're versatile.
If you're like, you can only win this one way, you're like, well, I'm winning.
Yeah, this is not the world championship team, right? This is not this is a team that should, when you look at how they did in spring, or how these guys have done in the past, they should be very happy if they make playoffs. They should be very happy, with those results and the improvements that they have had, kind of over the last couple of months. So yeah, I'm totally in agreement. Stick to what is working for you now. And maybe look for more diversity or whatever in the off season or whatever, right? Maybe you need something to get to that next step. But hey, I mean, the last 6 games, Fiora, Yorick, Camille, Yorick, Jace, Fiora, right? that is all split push. That is where all your wins are coming from, and some wins over over some teams that you certainly like wouldn't have expected them to beat. So I think I want to see them just double down on that, go for that sort of style versus TSM. They kind of have to then, from TSM side, you're preparing for that. You're trying to think of like how to get either like I wonder if red side becomes higher priority in this. Like
Right. So technically, Optic has side choice.
Okay.
Blue side in LCS, this split has about a 60% win rate. It has been, I think Echo Fox was the last team to choose red side, and that was over a month ago.
I feel like if you want to go all in on split push, though, you pick red side.
I
Because
don't think so.
because,
with
well,
all the
like-
bans that you have to do.
see, that's the thing though, because like I feel like split push is so much harder to do from blue side because you're giving Haunter, who actually is one of the more flexible players, last pick, right? And if TSM is smart, and if they're saying, okay, they're going to do this for sure. Yes, you can throw multiple bans at Haunter. You could like theoretically throw 5 bans at him before you get there, but you're also kind of self-banning too, right? Like, I think it's very difficult to have a successful split push game because I don't see Dokla as like the ultra dominant 1v1 top laner. Like, I feel like they're more playing around the advantages he has in matchups.
I agree that if you're just solely trying to counterpick for top lane, you would want red side, but also red side is map disadvantaged when trying to counterpick, so you also have to jungle path to that side as well and split the map vertically. But there's champions like Aatrox and Zoe that it just destroys your ban flexibility. I think that's why even teams that want to counterpick for top lane aren't doing it, because blue side gets so much out of first pick value and ban value.
Yeah, first pick value and junglers being able to secure top side from blue. Like your jungle pathing from your red buff up to the top side.
And draft advantage. You first
And
pick
that blast
Kindred,
zone
you
makes it
get
so
yeah,
much
something
easier.
like that.
There.
I think can also change those matchups a lot.
It's just interesting though, because like obviously like in NA we're so much on blue side, right? And we talked a lot over the last couple of weeks about like the importance of counterpicking and why we think that red side has been poor in NA versus in LPL, where it's actually has I think a little bit better win rate than blue
Yes.
side.
But like so
It's and so much of it to me is really just making advantage of the counter picks. Like there are map advantages, there are so many other things that go into it, but it's interesting because like this team, like we talk about being one dimensional, like this Optic feels extremely one-dimensional in that like this is their win condition, this is the way they're playing, and maybe they don't need that big of a matchup advantage because if like you said, hey, if you get Kindred or you get Nocturne or whatever, and you can just like help to kind of swing that matchup top, then maybe it doesn't matter as much. But it's just kind of interesting. It's making me think that maybe they'd want to actually kind of change it up and go for something different.
Got a question for you guys. How do you feel about the Akali situation right now? Because a lot of teams are like, oh my gosh, she's so good. You can get your solo kill whenever you want. But then you also team fighting with her has been pretty difficult for a lot of teams. And especially since she's new and people haven't, been able to space out their team fights really well. And she does like have some interesting timing windows that you actually have to allow for her to really be able to take a priority target.
Yep.
With the Bjergsen Power of Evo matchup already being super important, I feel like you shy away from an assassin. I don't think that an assassin in the mid lane actually wins this game for you.
I think TSM bans Akali if they're blue side. It's what they did last week when they had, I forget who they played on Sunday, but they banned, it was Echo Fox? No, 100 Thieves. It was against 100 Thieves. And Rio doesn't even play that much Akali, but they still banned a blue side because they had bans to spare. Akali's this weird champion to me where a lot of people are still figuring her out. She clearly has this insane amount of damage at level 6 that everyone has been able to abuse. The double dash with the stun to get a guaranteed E and get multiple Qs off with a energy reset from your shroud. Like that champion is just way overloaded at level 6. But in scrims, I was hearing that the champ would just hit 6, solo kill you, come back to lane, solo kill you, come back to lane, solo kill you, and then the game was over. But in pro, because everyone had that experience in scrims, they're like, well, he's level 6. I am going to give everything to this champion until I build magic resist or get level 9 and it becomes more reasonable. So even though she's almost permabanned, I almost don't know if she's going to stay that way.
And we
if that
saw
makes sense.
we saw PoE play it against Liquid, right?
Yeah.
And Pobelter played Galio and just kind of like sat back and farmed it out, and Liquid ended up slamming them. But
What's funny is he got a kill at 6 because he just walked into the enemy jungle and one shot the
oh,
Graves.
he killed Graves. Yeah,
that was their
yeah.
only kill of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it'll be interesting, right? I think it's one of those things where you can kind of play to tendencies. It's kind of like the Aatrox thing again, right? Where if you feel like you have the matchup, if you feel like you have the counter pick, then maybe you let it through. But I think TSM probably feels like they're, stronger at like the team fighting style, right? And I think that's probably true. So I think if you can just kind of like limit all the more like problematic champions like for enabling split push and for getting into side lanes, then that's probably a good way to win. And Akali, maybe you let it through because it's not actually that's like sort of split pushy style build, right? Like it's not the sort of champion, or at least I haven't seen it really be successful in side lanes yet.
Do you think TSM should ban it or try and first pick it?
I think they should leave it up because, like I said, I don't think an assassin wins you this game.
Yeah.
You want to give it to PoE.
Yeah, because
Take you to that. I mean, as long as you don't repeat that line like 10 times, Jet, where you're like, and it comes back and solo kills you, and comes back and solo kills you. If you stop it at like 2 or 3, and you're like, all right, we can do with like 3 solo kills. But if you keep going, it comes back and solo kills you 10 times in a row, then yeah.
Yeah, well, so with TSM Red side, they don't have as much ban flexibility, which is why you could leave it up. Because going through the bans that you want to do, I'm actually okay giving a Katie and Kindred. I'm not okay giving anyone Aatrox, so you ban Aatrox. But beyond that, Optic plays a unique enough champion pool that I think you have bans open. I think you ban Fizz and Akali with your Aatrox. I think that's what TSM's bans would be. But there's a lot more prep that goes into that stuff to try and figure it out. Who's going to win?
I think TSM will win simply because I think that there's so much importance on this game. Ooh. And the preparation for this game. Like you need to shut down the split push, and I think that like I give them enough credit and their coaching staff enough credit that they should be super preparing for split push, super preparing for what Doka could do, and kind of finding picks that would be answers for Haunter. If they fail to do that, they don't deserve to make playoffs. I mean, Optic has had a good run in the second half, but it has been fairly one-dimensional. If TSM like cannot prepare for that and answer that, then they don't deserve it.
I mean, we say it's only one-dimensional, only split push,
I think TSM's super one-dimensional too.
You forget about Optic's other strategy, which is PoE hard carry all 5 of us, and we win. That's also a bio.
It's like a TSM special from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
He has done that in some of the split push games too, like the RETP game, and he was like TPing everywhere, saving Dokla and stuff.
Yeah. So this is one of the ones where I definitely want to see champion select. Because again, I kind of have
an get to Kobe
idea for it, and it does kind of revolve a lot around PoE. But I think just so much. I feel like we're just so biased because of the history and because of the players on TSM and how good their pedigree is to like give them the advantage, right? History would skew us towards betting on TSM.
It's interesting because like I think that is true, but I think that I'm not favoring them for like the classical reasons. I'm not like, because I actually think PoE's better than Bjergsen right now, right? So it's like I when I'm looking at it, I'm actually giving the edge there to Power of Evil and to Optic, which is like never been the case for so long with TSM. You're always like, well, Bjergsen wins mid lane, right? Bottom lane, I still think that Sven has played like fairly well. Like Arrow has never been like really super impressive to me. Like I feel like even if they're playing passively, that's somewhat of a wash. Like jungle, I think I would probably maybe even favor Acadian, right? Like that's the area that I would favor them. But because I think like Dokla has found a way that is like he's winning and found something that has worked for him. But I've still never individually been impressed by like Dokla, his actual performance, even in these split push games. I feel like a lot of times he's like mechanically not playing it super well. And I still, when I watch Haunter, think that Haunter has had some very, very strong games individually. So for me, it's more just like, yeah, I think PoE is playing better than Bjergsen, but I don't think Bjergsen's like bad enough that he can just like 1v9 again if you're laying against Bjergsen, right? Like Bjergsen should be able to at least contain that, is like how I'm looking at it. And I think Haunter is just better than Dokla. So if they prepare for that 1v1 and Haunter's winning it and you're playing a split pusher, then you're forcing Optic into disadvantageous team fights, which is like kind of how I see it. because I don't see like the bottom lane for Optic as like enough of like playmakers that they would just like take over the game. Like it has to be about PoE. And though I think he's playing better than Bjergsen, I don't think he's enough better than Bjergsen that he just like takes over the game completely.
You think Mithy will be on point this game around, or will he get caught out a decent amount?
I think he'll be on point.
They're trying to play more aggressive, right? So like,
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance he'll get caught out a fair bit, but like, I think that it's okay if you're making smart, like if you're doing smart things, if you're not doing it for nothing, right?
It is
All right,
a
we have
spicy game.
2 TSMs then. What's your vote, Jet?
It's going to seem like we're just a bunch of TSM fanboys, but I give them a slight edge.
Yeah, I don't think it's like TSM's gonna win. Of course, I think that like for the reasons I've said, I give them an edge.
But like,
but PoE could take over a game. He could get out to the side lanes and snowball Dokla, and then they win the game, or Katie takes over, or whatever, right? Like I think it's close, and it's shocking to say that. I think because of the pedigree of TSM, but it's going to be an exciting game.
Yeah,
And
Optic's
it's gonna dictate
already
a lot.
beaten TSM.
Yep.
Right? TSM has done so many bad things this split that we do continue to give them the benefit of the doubt. Someone did a fun facts about Mark Z and Jat's predictions.
Yeah.
And he had predicted TSM more than he had predicted any other team to win. Right? But it's because every time we look at a close matchup of like, oh yeah, TSM 6-6 and Clutch is 6-6. Well, who do you give it to? You usually give it to the team with more history and more experience, and you expect them to be better later. And this is the blow-up candidate game, because not only if TSM loses do they lower their chances, they'll still technically be able to win against TL to get to 9 wins, but they would lose the tiebreaker to Optic if they both are at 9-9, because Optic is 2-0, which would require another team to be tied with them at 9 in order to actually get the tiebreaker. So it feels like a lose in your out game for TSM, and because of that, it's the final gut check. Well, Optic, if they then
they would be
100
tied with
Thieves, would be
TSM
tied with
more,
TSM
yeah.
and then get a tiebreaker game. So there's more pressure on TSM, and I can't wait to see it.
This is going to be a super
Yeah,
good game.
that's it. That's all I got. We can't do more depth to it because these teams are too damn inconsistent.
All right, Cloud9, they've had their huge resurgence from Cloud 10th to potentially a playoff bye.
It's such a good story. This is some super anime stuff, right?
Gotta
Sneaky
get
and
contracts
Jensen,
back.
they came back in. All of Reapered swapping up and down, and their intense focus on the academy team paid off, right? In the smashing, the Golden Glue and Sven Skaren destruction of
Paul
Team
Belter.
Liquid. The whole team, but mostly Paul Belter.
It was Paul Belter. They just killed him over and over again. Under his turret, in his Nexus. No, not quite.
Man, but Sven Skaren back on Lee Sin, Golden Glue playing offensively in the mid lane. That was definitely a good look, and especially with all of the fan criticism towards Cloud9 and all the roster swaps and everything over the season, that must be the most vindicating feeling for those players. Like, they were so happy afterwards. I was happy to see them with smiles on their faces.
Yeah. And I mean, I was super critical of subbing back in Golden Glue and Sven Skaren.
Yeah,
because-
shut up, Jet.
Yeah, and then Reapered, the guts that it takes for Reapered to do that swap in this game and then have it work, like, I just had to congratulate him after the game. Like, I'm sorry, that was what it worked.
Yeah.
I did not expect it to work. I think the majority of people did not expect that to work. We have I'm gonna throw Tyler under the bus, our observer who's just a diehard C9 fan. Like, no matter what, is always like, C9's got this. I'm fully in faith. He saw that they did the swap and he's like, there's no way this works. Like, I'm done with this team. And then they won, and he's back on the bed.
Yeah, he's
right?
like,
And he's
I knew it all along.
Because it was so crazy that it worked in that way. That not only did they sub them in to win against TL, the number 1 team, but they dominated that game with the 2 people that they subbed in.
Yeah. And, again, the reason why we were all so shocked at the beginning is because they had done so well already with Jensen back in. You know, they had this formula, and we're like, great.
They've already beaten TL with Jensen and Faber.
They have this formula, right? They've got the Zillion, the Kindred. You know, Jensen was already in. They're winning. And it was like a cruel joke where they're like, all right, now that we are back in
Now that
top
we're
standing,
tied for 5th.
switch things up, and they still won. What do you got, Azale?
Yeah, it was definitely crazy. It worked out, but I still feel like I can't like have bet on that move, right? It's one of those things where it's like, yes, it worked out, but a 90-10 can work against you 10% of the time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's that.
However,
but like even maybe it was like it's one of those things where just all of my history of competition, all my history of watching sports and playing in tournaments, all these things has always taught me like give it to the hot hand type of thing, right? Like you don't take someone out when they're
I mean,
slamming.
that's what I said before the game.
And
100%.
so again, I'm not saying that this like it obviously worked. It worked great. It like they can laugh at our face.
What about the wrinkle of Reapered saying they had practiced versus Team Liquid with the Jensen in combo exclusively, and then this was the.
And I read that, but like still to me, it's just at a certain point when people are on, they're on. Like I believe that so much because that is my whole tournament experience. We would play 4-man tournaments and like we would play a comp that looked worse because someone was like just slamming, right? And we would always trust that, and it has always like kind of worked out for me in the past. So I just felt like this combo was so on that if I'm that coach, I never make that move, right? Like unless maybe the player is like, oh god, I'm gonna lose, take me out, right? Like if it's like
I've won 6 games in a row, I just know I can't pick it up.
Like my luck is running out.
Like,
I can feel it. The loss.
If it's like that, that's like legit the only scenario, right? If it's like a mental block of Jensen, like if he got slammed all week in scrims and they're like, there's no way I can win this, right? Then sure you make that move, but otherwise, from my point of view, I just would never make that change. So like I think it worked. But I still don't love it, and I'm still not. I won't be convinced until they're able to make it work in playoffs.
Yeah, here's
okay.
This one little quick thing. I also kind of agree with that because I was thinking, yes, you know they have had great success with Svenskeren and Golden Glue in scrims, and they keep on talking about all this stuff, but literally for years. Every team with Golden Glue has been like, he is a scrim god. He is smashing everyone. Everyone would rather scrim against Golden Glue than our main mid laner. They're saying that now, but they have said that for years, and it hasn't translated to stage. But now it did.
and the start of spring.
And Rick was a genius.
Start of summer, right? Like Golden Glue was playing well individually. That's why this felt more different this year than ever before, because even though he was losing on stage, I felt like he was playing well on stage in this split, whereas in the past, everyone's like, he's a scrim god, and then he comes on, he plays bad, and he loses, right? So at least now, at the start, he was still losing, but he was playing well, and now he played well, and he won, so it's like he's clearly getting there, but it's hard for me to still like
talent,
be like
baby.
all in on it and be like, wow, you were right all along, right? Like that is the smart move. Like I don't know if it was I would never have bet on that.
Yeah. I do want to take a step back and look at Cloud9 and their path from here. They are red side against 100 Thieves, and then they play against FlyQuest. So it's actually one of the harder schedules going into the last week, and they're still not clinched for playoffs. They have to win one of those games if they want to guarantee their spot. There's also a chance that 9 wins gets you a tiebreaker game and you get in from there. So with the current momentum, the fact that they'd won all those games in a row, the fact that they swapped in Golden Glue and Svenskeren, I can't in good faith predict against them, but I don't want to just for free give them these wins. I think there's still essentially a lot of work that they have to do because right now, like my perception of them is, okay, they just beat Liquid, they smashed them, they can beat 100 Thieves, they can beat FlyQuest. Hell, they might even get a playoff bye.
One of the best teams
because
in the
they
league.
could be 11-7 and wow, now they're going to, it's going to be TL versus C9 in the finals is what you're thinking. But because of the hole they dug themselves early on in the year, even losing one of those games can drastically hurt that. What do you think about the momentum that they have and how consistent it can be?
I never really am that interested in momentum when people talk about it in sports. What I am super interested in is now, Azale, that both of the sets are the hot hand and have won.
One win makes you the hot hand?
Yeah.
That's all it takes?
A one win like that where they literally, those two won
100% of my last game.
Those two won the entire game themselves. I'm going to give them credit for that. Now what do you play against 100 Thieves? Who do you start? Who's your right? That's the whole thing. Now Reaper's got the extra mind games. He's got, because he took that gamble, now he has all this extra power. Oh, we're going to scrim against these guys, use this one. Which one's going to be?
And can that hurt you? Right?
Can.
Not settling on 5.
Having too many options is a good thing, Jack.
When you go to a Chinese restaurant, there's 150 things on the menu. Are you happy that you have that many options? Or would you rather go to Chipotle and be like, I get to pick between these 5 meats?
Does the menu have pictures?
No, it doesn't. There's 150
pictures?
things.
Oh, no.
Like 6 of the options have pictures.
That's.
Sometimes too much choice is
I
bad.
might just pick one of the pictures then.
Like Cheesecake Factory. You go to Cheesecake Factory and there's like 400 things on the menu.
I know. I already know what to get at Cheesecake Factory. I only get 2 things.
Okay.
Okay, so you're one of those people that wants to start the same 5 people because it's simple.
So I mean, the thing where I think it can
Not 150 things can be good.
the
Like,
thing,
there's no way.
okay. The thing I think where it can hurt you a little bit is like, so I think it's always good to have the option, but like decision paralysis can be a real thing where it's like it's tough, right? Like,
Okay, we only got 2 here though, guys. We don't have 150
No, we don't.
members for Cloud9 to choose between.
but which do you then weigh more heavily, right? Do you weigh like the fact that like scrim performance this week? Do you decide it based on scrim performance? Do you decide it based on overall stage performance, where Jensen overall has had more success with Blabber on stage than the Golden Glue Sunserum pairing? Or do you wait, like, okay, well, they beat the best team in the league and they slammed them. Like, that's where I think it gets hard, is just like, how do you now decide which is the better duo to run? Because I think before this TL game, everyone would clearly say, well, of course you have to run Jensen and Blabber, right? But to your point, the way in which they won, where these 2 people carried the game against the best team in the league, they absolutely blasted them. Does that now change it, right? And I think that is hard. And sometimes you can end up reading just too much into one game, right? Not saying that these guys cannot do this every game, but just because you do something one time does not mean every game is going to look like that.
Okay, for me, my answer would be a Jensen Blabber combination, because I feel like that one has a more consistent chance against 100 Thieves for this matchup. 100 Thieves almost doesn't do anything in the early game. They are not gonna, contest a lot of these early game moves, right? So I feel like the consistency with a supportive mid lane, which has actually been super offensive for Jensen, like the zillion flash bombs and stuff, plays that he's been able to create, have been really
You want the over-aggressive jungler.
aggressive in nature. But also the fact that they have this fallback pattern where they have the revive later in the game, they can actually push the tempo pretty quickly with this. With the speed enabling Blabber to do a lot of the early doing that he's doing. I think that would be the more consistent win against 100 Thieves. Obviously, you can also argue, just put in Sven and Golden Glue and have them do what they did to Team Liquid.
Yeah,
like, it's
I mean, that will work
hard to
against
argue
anyone.
against the strategy of, go 7-0 in the first 5 minutes versus the other
Good
mid
strategy,
lane
I like
jungle
that.
duo. Like,
What's the path to go
but
7-0,
exactly.
Kobe?
That's not exactly a strategy.
If you just do that every game, you're going to climb.
yeah.
You'll be rank 1.
Does it change it at all that Anda had the amazing Poppy game? If you're saying like, okay,
That's true.
if we could get
It's a Lee
Lee
Sin
Sin
blocker.
if we could get
So I already was going Blabber before that. Now that they have like, that's such a good block for Lee Sin, I think that does remove a lot of
because he slammed
Sven
Dark. Like
potential,
he was counter jungling him.
true.
He was not
Yeah.
his ganks. He was stopping the playmaking.
Poppy easy.
Yeah. So
I think the default for them should be Jensen and Blabber,
Yeah, me
because
too.
that's the thing that has actually won them the most games. And then if those guys are ever struggling, if Blabber's ever feeling a little bit stressed or something, then I think you bring in Svenskeren and Golden Glue. That's how I hope they approach it.
Or if they're feeling the 7-0 at 4 minutes.
if they're feeling
team-
They're
it
like,
in there,
Reaper, today's the day.
I do want to talk. This has been a long episode since Kobe is more long-winded than Freak, apparently, in our episodes.
That's me.
That's Kobe.
So how come
FlyQuest, though.
how come you don't take free spot or you don't take free spot? Why do I have to be the replacement, huh?
you're just the freak. Because the
'Cause he
people
sit-
who are
because
here,
he sat
yeah,
here?
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
The people who are here,
Yeah, we get to make the decisions.
Okay.
You lost seniority. You've been on the show for less episodes.
Total?
Yep.
Probably.
Yep.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I've been in the most. You've been in the second most, and I think
Yeah,
Kobe's.
yeah.
Because you've missed like 4
I missed one episode.
of the 50.
Check the tape.
You've missed 2 episodes.
Check
well,
the tape.
if you count the franchise,
Yeah,
one,
you missed
but
one
that was,
episode.
a different.
yeah,
story.
that counts.
No, it's one.
The one where we flipped a coin to see who
Yeah.
would,
All right.
would sit out.
FlyQuest.
FlyQuest. is a team that isn't necessarily discussed that much. There was not that much preseason hype before. Our aggregate power rankings at the start of the split had them in 10th because it didn't seem like they'd made many meaningful improvements. They'd got rid of Rapid Star. They'd added St. Vicious. They had Fly go back to Korea. They were just going to go with Keen the whole time, right? They brought in Santorin, which a lot of us saw as a side grade from Anda. Yet here they are at 9-7 with one of the easiest week 9 schedules, most likely going to 10-7 and then having that game against Cloud9. They are still in contention for a playoff bye. I think it's time to give them, a little bit of credit.
Yeah.
Like FlyQuest has been that emergent team, I feel like, of the split.
I think they definitely deserve a lot of credit, and I would also look to some of the roster swaps and stuff that they have had, right? Like I think JJ, since he has come in, like that was an academy guy that we weren't even really looking at in our power rankings at the start of the split, and he came in, and I think he has had such a big effect on the team. We've also heard, players consistently giving a large amount of credit to St. Vicious and to his coaching, and to the fact that, he is kind of like teaching them different things. And he has talked a lot about teaching them tempo and the timings of things and how long it takes to get from one place on the map to another, or how long it takes to kill turrets. And they kind of talked a little bit about that as some of the reasons that they've won all these crazy games, because they felt they have a better understanding of you're here, I'm there, we can kill your base faster kind of thing, right? So I think that's pretty exciting, and it is another good NA support coming up. I feel like that is one of the areas where we actually have some kind of promising players. Big is another guy who I think has been getting some credit this year as kind of an emerging talent there too.
Yeah, I mean, St. Vicious, people meme on him a lot because he's been in the scene for so long, and there are a lot of different stories attached to him. But he has a tremendous amount of experience. He's literally been playing with us since the game came out, since before Season 1 as well. And he's been through so many different iterations of the meta that he has done a very good job, I think, of pulling together a lot of those loose strings that we were looking at the FlyQuest lineup, and we're like, they have a lot of good individual players. But a lot of their struggles early on, they just look so chaotic. They weren't really able to pull together even a cohesive strategy in a single game, much less string together multiple games. So definitely deserve the credit.
Yeah, I will also say that their wins have come in a less convincing way than a lot of the other 9-7 teams.
Yeah.
They had the 2 base race wins, which, while impressive, were still situations where the game hinges on a single decision to decide who wins or loses. There's very rare. I think they've had 1 or 2 games where they've actually had a very large gold lead and then closed out in a standard fashion of the 9.
But a lot of those have been more recent, I think, is why you building a little bit more of the
confidence.
Yeah.
Because of the recency. I think at this point, this team is in the playoffs. They're not officially in the playoffs, but if they beat Golden Guardians on Saturday, they're in. But then the question kind of becomes, where do they go from here? Because I believe it was one of the FlyQuest players in an interview was like, I just want to get into the playoffs, and then maybe we can prepare for the regional qualifier and go to Worlds. There was no mention of so we can win the finals. Because that's also another way you can go to Worlds, is if you just do it and go as the number 1 seed. I don't think that is in their mind right now. I don't think they're in the contender spot, even though technically they're only 2 wins behind first and they can still get a playoff bye. But just the journey they've gone through from here, I don't think they're in that mindset yet.
Yeah, and we see that a lot with teams that have really bad starts. They don't have the mentality of actually playing for the win, for the championship. They're like, oh, we're on a 5-game win streak, 7-game win streak or whatever. We're lucky to be here, or we're happy to be here. We had some interviews last split with Clutch when they were on such a good thing. And they're like, cool.
Yeah.
We won. Didn't really expect it. So.
And Apollo's
success.
quote like that, I immediately think of anytime someone talks about that is, I always looked at those banners and I didn't think those were for me, right? Like that, like he didn't even consider the possibility of winning a championship, and then they beat TSM, and it was kind of like the realization, like, holy shit, I could actually, maybe it is, right? Like maybe I could do it. And I think a lot of the teams do kind of fall prey to that mindset sometimes, where it's because they haven't done it or because they haven't had that history or whatever, they don't even think that they could. which I think can kind of hurt you mentality-wise.
Yeah, especially some of the older players that have been in the league during the dominance of all these other organizations, Cloud9 and TSM and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They've been conditioned, through the history and the.
Like a beaten dog.
They're like, those are not for you.
I could never be good. Real quick,
Man,
before we move on to Twitter questions, we're just going right past that. Everyone can be a winner. Who do you think will get the playoff buys?
Team Liquid.
Team Liquid's definitely the easiest answer.
Yeah, Team Liquid's at 11 wins. 100 Thieves is at 10 wins.
Yeah,
but they also play Cloud9 first up, who's at 9 wins, because technically Cloud9, FlyQuest, Echo Fox, 100 Thieves all have the chance for the second bye. And Team Liquid, could lose 2 games and we'd be in this really weird situation. I just don't think that'll happen. So I'm going to say you'd be foolish to not say Team Liquid will get a playoff bye.
Yeah.
I agree. I also think...
Because it basically comes down to if 100 Thieves beats Cloud9, then they just get it. So they have the highest chance.
Looking at the schedules, it's tough too, because 100 Thieves plays Cloud9 and Optic, so they play 2 playoff teams. Echo Fox plays Clutch and then Liquid, so you'd expect them maybe to lose to Liquid but beat Clutch, right? Like there's C9 has a tough schedule for their they play Fly. Yeah, C9 plays FlyQuest and 100 Thieves. Like so, it's like there's not a lot of like easy schedules for those teams to make that movement. So it makes me feel like it's more likely that things kind of like stay around where they are, because I don't see like, oh, C9 plays like Clutch and Golden Guardians, they can get an easy 2-0 and move up, right? Like it feels like, okay, teams are going to probably trade games. They're all around the same level. They're like, but 100 Thieves has a 1-game lead. TL has a 2-game lead. Makes me feel like
also I think people don't think of 100 Thieves as a scary team because of the style that they play. You don't ever hear people like even in the same, but even with Echo Fox below them, people are like, oh, but that crazy Hooney and Dardock, and now they have lost, in the bottom lane. Like they
Meanwhile,
they have
100
more
Thieves just
things.
dominated
Exactly.
them.
Meanwhile, 100 Thieves, this is again, they dominated in spring as well.
Yeah.
Able to get second. Now again, they're in second place, and you don't hear anyone being like, oh yeah, Team Liquid and 100 Thieves. It's always Team Liquid and like a lot of other guys. But Aframu someday are really the stars of this team, and they have been performing very well. So
you're going 100 Thieves?
I think they will. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it stays the same, just because all those teams all play 2 playoff teams. It doesn't seem like easy schedules for anyone, so it's like it's a hard 2-0.
Well, if Cloud9 beat them,
I'm going with Cloud9.
Yeah.
Ride the hot hand.
It's definitely possible. I mean, if Cloud9 beats 100 Thieves and FlyQuest,
If you look at the second half of the split, they're the best team in
lose
the league.
both their games.
Yeah, and they play 100 Thieves, so they should be able to beat them.
And then 100 Thieves will play Optic as well. It would be 100 Thieves versus Optic, FlyQuest versus C9. So, I mean, it's all playoff teams. All these teams can beat each other, certainly.
Oh, I want to tell people about tiebreaker stuff, because I think that's cool.
do it.
If there are more than 2 tiebreaker games at the end, they will be played on a special tiebreaker day on Monday. So last split, when we had 5 tiebreaker games,
10 games,
they all happened on the same day. But it was the team's request to get a little bit more prep time for those incredibly important matches and do them on the following day. So details will obviously be shared if we end up having more than 2 tiebreaker games, but that's something that I will be excited for. And Cloud9 victory will probably give us some tiebreaker games if they're trying to get that playoff bye. So that'll be pretty hype if it happens.
Last split, that was a super crazy day, and it was really fun. I enjoyed it. I like the long days where we get super loopy and everything's going crazy, and we're like, what's the tiebreaker now? Oh, crazy stuff's happening. And like
our season's not
the fans also enjoy it.
Like we don't like not go to Worlds because you got tired.
Exactly. That's the point. It's like, this is mostly for the teams that are like, these are important. I'm glad everyone's going crazy and having fun over there, but
my brain is literally coming out my ears, melting. I'm tired.
Yeah, so.
And I think it's cool just in general that like some of these changes recently have been made that teams have been wanting to do it. So I kind of like the idea that the league is having some flexibility with that. Strategic coach, that was a team requested change. 7-man roster, team requested change. Playoffs on a tiebreakers on a separate day, team requested change. These are all little things that I think the teams have wanted and hopefully will result in more happiness for the players, but also better performances on the stage. Right? We want good drafts, so we want those 2 coaches on there. We want good games. So
I want some bad drafts.
You want some garbage drafts.
Some crazy drafts. I want some
Kobe,
Timo. Get some Timo in my league, Zale.
Yeah, some Rammus support, some Timo AD, and we'll get in there. So that's what we're going to do. The last team we want to hit on a little bit is CLG. A full year, kind of a failure. We talked about Zix, and his stepping down. We talked about that a lot last week, so we don't really get too much into that. But just like, where do you guys see CLG going from here? Kind of funny, we were joking about and talking about like, should teams break up? Should they blow up? Right? Like, this is a team that whether or not I think they should, I do feel very strongly that they will. Based on some of the like tweets and some of the messages and stuff that you're hearing.
I mean,
like,
you can already just base it on the fact they released their coach without a replacement coach.
And Darshan's
right?
The mic check or whatever, where he's like, it's been a real pleasure playing with you guys. Let's just try our best. I really enjoyed it. And like, it sounds like dead man walking. It sounds like, the team has already accepted that they're not going to be together anymore. And I think that is, a sad reality for the players, a sad reality for a lot of the fans. But I think that is just going to happen. I think we're not going to see the same CLG next year.
I mean, it's the second split in a row they've missed playoffs.
Yep.
After basically getting a whole new ownership group and a whole new management group in there. So the fact that they've already released their coach means that they want to make changes. Golden Guardians is another team that is also eliminated from Worlds. They're the two teams that are both officially eliminated from Worlds right now. I think that they're going to pick some of the guys to stick with. And I would not be surprised if they played some academy guys this week just to give them a little bit of stage time since their season is over. You no longer have to worry about keeping everything together until the relegation tournament. So I think that gives them more freedom to do something like that. If I had to guess, I would say that maybe Stixay and Biofrost would be the guys that they're going to stick with. It's really interesting too. Like, when they were first placed, that was the week the news broke that he got his green card too. And you're thinking, wow, sky's the limit for COG. They have this domestic mid laner now. He's been with the org for so many years. It's going to be super interesting what COG decides to do because all of those guys have really deep roots with COG and with the fan base. Darshan's been with them for years. Even Rainover at this point has been with them for 2 years. Huhi as well got his green card playing for COG. It's not a choice that I'd want to make, but I think at this point COG has to.
So a lot of those guys have been there a long time. I'm not like sure how maybe thick the roots are. Like they're old, but have we really had the strong personality grasp on CLG brand since like Double Lift, Aframu?
I would say with Darshan we have.
Smithy. Darshan,
I completely associate with CLG.
Yeah.
Zion Spartans, pushing in Nasus and Jax and all this stuff. Like that to me, he is CLG, period.
For Rainover, though, I mean,
I agree with that.
Especially in the offseason, we heard like his salary is super big. And people were like betting on, is risk gonna be okay and all this stuff. And I definitely agree with Azale. I think there will be some changes. I think that these teams at the bottom, like CLG and Golden Guardians, should be going to more extremes with their headhunting. Like, you hear stories from China where they've got, maybe don't go this extreme, but they have the illegally birth certificates trying to get them the right age or whatever to even be able to play because they've scouted all of these guys ahead of time. So definitely don't go illegal. Don't do these
story
things.
There was that IG was trying to prove that Jackie Love was 17, and a bunch of other teams were trying to prove that he wasn't 17.
Yeah,
we don't know if they illegally forged a birth certificate. That's just like.
Anyways, the point of the story is, I want to see people going.
Forged birth certificate.
You gotta want it.
I want to see people finding people like TF Blade, Solo Q Superstar. Fans get excited for that stuff. They're like, "Oh, I want to see how this guy does it."
Hotshot GG waiting in Faker's house.
I want to have some people that are on academy teams that are ready to come in that are like, this guy's got 25 solo kills in a single game. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah. But he's only played solo queue or whatever for his whole life. And we're like, well, I'm willing to gamble on that. I'll definitely tune in to see, if, X new guy, Riven Main can play a different champion or something like that.
And TF Blade's a good example of that. Like, maybe we don't know if the guy wants to play pro, but like he's legitimately a consistent rank 1 player
I would love
on any
to see
server
that.
he plays. I'd love to see a team try and turn him into
really
a pro
exciting.
player.
So my question for you guys then is just even looking at Golden Guardian CLG. So if the most people are assuming teams are going to change things up, right? who are the player or players that you build around, right? You could say one guy you think you have to keep, or two guys, or whatever. Like, I'm curious what your opinion on that. For CLG, for me, I would definitely think you would keep Stixay at the very least.
Okay.
When I'm looking at Golden Guardians, I think definitely has had a really good
I think
split.
you have to keep the whole bottom lane for CLG. I keep Bio for sure. Yeah.
So is that those are your guys for CLG? You already said that for CLG.
I like the bot lane. I like contracts as well.
So for Golden Guardians, you think you just keep contracts?
Yeah, but and the bottom lane. Like, I think definitely
Okay,
is super high potential. I think contracts is good. It depends a lot on the interpersonal workings of the teams as well, and who's like a shot calling voice. Yeah. But what's also interesting is when you look at the contract database, most teams have guys under contract until 2019, 2020. So there was this huge flurry of movement in the offseason with franchising, and most guys got signed to 2- and 3-year deals. So it's not like a normal offseason where you just get to pick from all these other free agents that are out there. You have to do your digging and find your solo queue superstar, or find this really big name import to try and pull in. And you got to see if you want to double down on your investment. So, but I think the bot lanes are both good for both those teams.
Cool. All right. Well, we got some Twitter questions here. First one's going to come from Alvin Zhang, and he asks, why not have the Drake combination / order determined via RNG just prior to game or side selection? That way teams can prepare strategies around Drake permutations, or team comps roughly remain the same. This is something we actually, like, I was still on playtest when they were putting this in. This is something we talked about extensively. And honestly, from my point of view, it was a change that I wanted. I always thought it was kind of nice, because if you see, all right, it's 3 Infernals in a row at the start of the game. Yeah. Maybe you want to have, like Lucian and Lissandra and whatever you're considering your level 6 like power spike types champions to fight for all those dragons, and then you're saying, all right, well, who cares if we get outscaled later, because we're gonna have triple Infernal. So I actually like that idea of kind of crafting compositions around that personally. Yeah.
I do too. I mean, I, again, would literally take any extra information and you put that into your planning in your draft selection, even in solo queue. If it's going to be a Mountain Drake first, but then there's 2 Infernos coming after it, then I'm like, well, I actually want to get this Mountain out of the way and kill it early.
Bot sides, you have priority.
Yeah, exactly. Like, maybe I wouldn't rush that before. A lot of times people just leave some dragon up or whatever. It's not that high priority. We don't need this one, but I want to get to the other ones. So yeah. I mean, I like it. What was the argument against if that you were like arguing against on the playtest team?
I think a lot of the discussion, and this was a while ago now, so like what I have it in my head as was a lot of talk about. It's just like more like kind of like the interest or excitement. They want people to be able to adapt and change their stuff based on like what's happening on game. So it's like, okay, you get in, you play the Infernal, so now you're changing your strategy there. So I think it was the idea was less about pre-planned stuff and more about adaptation and playing on the fly. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that I heard a decent bit of was they didn't want people picking champions based on the dragons. So you love playing Jinx, and that's what you want to play, then well, maybe I'm pissed that you're playing Jinx because it's 3 Infernals in a row, right? And now I think that the Lucian or the Draven on the other team is going to get priority. So I think it was kind of those ideas. But again, this was a couple years ago. So
yeah, and I think there is a lot to be said for game states feeling different, and some of the negative, and this is just what I'm thinking off the top of my head. I don't remember exactly what the design decisions were, but imagine a situation you're in champ select and solo queue, and you hate Cloud Drakes, and you're like, this is a triple Cloud game. Do you dodge? Right? Does that just create another barrier to get into the game? Right? Because once you're in the game too, or you get into the situation where, oh man, there's just a bunch of mountains in this game. Does no one go to Drake?
I mean,
is it just boring? Because if you never know what the next thing is, and the next thing could always be enticing, you're gonna like go for it, and it's gonna keep things more exciting. So there are some downsides that definitely exist to this, even though like the strategic part of us thinks, yeah, give me way more information. Like, tell me when exactly all the plants are going to spawn, and tell me what the order of the scuttle crabs is going to be. But there's a certain amount of adaptation on the fly that can be really good.
And especially for pro, I think it's like you are all on the same team. You're all opting into this. You are all playing the same strategy, right? So I think that for pro, knowing the dragon spawns makes more sense. Yeah. Whereas solo queue, maybe I just want to play my style no matter what, right? There's triple Infernals, so you're going to yell at me that I'm picking Tryndamere because I'm just going to be splitting, right? Like, maybe I just want to play that, right? And I didn't opt into playing with, like, a certain strategy that you guys want to play. So I can definitely see it from that point of view, especially for solo queue.
Yeah. Last Twitter question of the day, Cam Edgecombe going to put you guys on the spot here. You're inventing a new summoner spell. What's it do? And what's its CD? I feel like if there's a really cool summoner spell, we would have done it by now. While you guys are thinking, I want to take a trip down memory lane.
Okay.
Do you remember Rally?
Mm-hmm.
That was a fun summoner spell.
It was OP. That's why
it was super
fun.
OP. It was literally a flag that you put down that would heal people in the area, like a Janna ult, but less powerful, and then also give you attack speed, like a Janna ult with Ardent Sensor. So you just take that every game and just drop rallies in team fights. That was bad. There was Fortify, was an old one that actually made a turret invulnerable for a short period of time if you just pressed it.
So I have an idea. Again, this is not thinking about balance or anything. This is off the top of my head. But there was what if there's a summoner spell which essentially within X range you can swap places with a teammate, right? So like as a support you can swap them out. Like your AD gets hooked in, I swap myself into that.
People are gonna troll with that.
People definitely could, right? But again, it's like in principle it sounds pretty fun. I feel like, right? It's like
a lot of fun things can be used as weapons.
Totally, right? But there's also in some games there are ways that things can be trolled, and then you can disable interaction so people can do it to you or whatever. But I think that it's that could be fun, right? It's like a talent dives in and does his combo, and then I'm Alistar and I swap him out and I combo in, and or my Jinx gets pulled and I can even if I'm a Nami or something, maybe it's worth it for me to just swap in and die so my Jinx gets saved.
Super busted actually.
It sounds kind of fun, but again, it would all be the strength of it would be based on the distance, right?
Yeah.
So if it swaps you 2 feet, then it's all of a sudden it's not so good. But if it's a whole screen, then it's insane, right? So just off the top of my head, I think that would be fun to play with.
Yeah.
No idea about balance. No idea about if it would actually work.
I always think mobility is really fun. So more options for mobility would be cool. Because then also we take it for granted that Flash is the go-to.
Yeah.
But if there are multiple options for your mobility summoner, and maybe we have your mobility one,
or
and
swap people.
we have 2 options here and 2 kind of classifications of summoner spells. Maybe there's a bunch of different mobility ones. Or what if there's a crowd control summoner spell? We have Ignite as a damage one. And we used to have Exhaust where it did a little bit more. Now it slows and reduces your damage a bit. But what if there's a blind or a disorient or something like that?
Yeah.
What if this is a bad idea. Hex Flash was just a summoner spell, but it was a better version of it. Right? Or it's you take a summoner spell that just lets you go through walls, or a summoner spell that can destroy terrain every 3 minutes or something.
Yeah.
That
Or hook shot to stuff, or bounce off stuff, or
Anyway.
Yeah, movement's fun.
I think there is a reason that there's not more summoner spells, but they're very hard to find because literally every champion can access it.
It changes the balance for every single champion in the whole game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of The Dive. We had a lot to catch up on, Kobe. I think this was our longest episode of The Split. We're at 91 minutes.
Solid connection.
So thank you for everyone who listened this far. And remember, this is the last week of the regular season for the North American LCS. We will find out who goes to playoffs. The action kicks off 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Saturday. NA LCS Countdown is there, followed by Echo Fox and Team Liquid. And then later in the day, Optic versus TSM, which we talked about exclusively. See you there.